February 18th, Evans Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting. Let's call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please take roll?
Yes. Chair Steelman? Vice Chair Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Behrens?
Here.
Member Kendall? Member Pickering?
Here.
All right, our first item of business is approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda?
No, Chair. Or Vice Chair, sorry.
Seeing that there's none, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I second that.
Or, sorry, you'll have to move it. We need a move first.
I moved to. Sorry, I messed it up. Sorry. So I moved to approve the agenda.
Second that.
The motion has been moved and second. All of those in favor say aye.
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 And then, cool. The consent agenda is reserved for matters which are considered to be routine and uncontroversial. Any items may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda at the request of the chair, Parks and Rec Advisory Board member, staff, or members of the public. Next on the agenda is the consent. Is there motion to approve the consent agenda?
A motion to approve the agenda.
Second it.
The motion has been moved and second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes. Business, or do we just report?
So we don't have any new business on the agenda tonight, so we can just move on to reports.
Next item on the agenda is reports. Are there any reports?
Yes. Can I take it away? Perfect. Nice to meet you all. My name's Ty Boreski. I'm the Public Works and Utilities Director. Parks was under, I believe when you all came on the board, it was under its own Parks and Rec department. Since then, we had some transition. So the parks maintenance side of the world is now under the Public Works umbrella. I'm here today with two folks instrumental into maintaining and operating our park system. We have Daniel Kiefer. He's the field service manager. So he oversees all of the field operations associated with streets, water, the parks team. And then we have Ashley Hansen here. She's our park superintendent. She manages the 10-ish staff members, full-time and part-time, under our parks umbrella. And so we gave this presentation to City Council a few months ago, just kind of providing an overview on the state of parks now. We know we're in a period of transition, so let's set the baseline and then kind of let's talk about a little bit of our leadership style, our priorities, and give you some insight into how we're hoping to improve the city's park system. So first, we're kind of going to go over the Parks Division, its structure, the state of the parks. We'll talk about all of the elements of our park system, and then we'll jump into some of the priorities we have for maintenance, how we're going to be conducting business moving forward, and highlight some of the 2025 CIP projects. We brought 3 new parks online, and it's worth celebrating. So the Parks Division is responsible for the maintenance of 14 parks, all open spaces, and over 4 miles of trails. We play a large role in capital projects. So we have an engineering department. They lead a lot of the kind of baseline work for new construction. But these two are actively involved in any project to help make sure the operational goals are aligned with the engineering design side of things. We also operate and maintain the city's cemetery. We're responsible for forestry and tree health throughout the city, in parks, open space, and along right-of-way. We maintain the city facility landscaping and beautification efforts. An example of this is we're actually about to put a new sign up at the Evans Junction. That maintenance of that new signage will be the responsibility of the Parks Division. And then we support development review. So when new developments come in, like Liberty Draw, they have parks associated with them, green belts. And so from an operational perspective, these two are pretty actively involved in making sure that what we accept into the city, what we accept in the park system, what we accept for maintenance fits our standards and is something that we could take on in a seamless transition. So state of our parks, you all are in the community. You kind of know what the baseline is. There are some pictures on here that aren't fun, but what they identify to me is low-hanging fruit, areas for improvement, and that's something that Daniel, myself, and Ashley are going to work towards, just up-leveling the state of our parks now that they're under the Public Works umbrella. So here you can see Prairie View, Pioneer, and Riverside Park. The landscaping here it's not acceptable for what we expect. If you went through other communities in northern Colorado, Windsor, Greeley, you would not see this type of landscaping that's just unkept. It kind of shows a lack of caring in the state of the parks, and so it's not fun to talk about the bad, but there is room for improvement here, and we have the staff now to really make sure that you can read the signs in the park, and that's something that we're going to bring before the board in the next few months is an updated park signage plan. Trees, Riverside Park, when it was originally built, had trees all through the parking lots and park, and now it is barren. We had dead trees at Renaissance Park, Prairie View Park. I think we've taken out a chunk of these husks since we took these pictures, but this is what we inherited. We had dead trees throughout the city in our park system. In Prairie View here, the reason they died is because they had a defunct irrigation system that wasn't watering them. And in our climate, we can't have trees succeed without really taking our irrigation seriously. Cemetery, you can look at this picture and quickly say this is unacceptable for families visiting, for burials. If you go out there today, you will see a very different picture. Nothing's growing, but as we get into the summer seasons, this will not happen. And then equipment and facilities. I have Vineyard Park, Village Park, and Ridge Park here. You could see the defunct signage that's kind of has rules that aren't compatible with the Evans Municipal Code. We have things that looks like got kind of taped over. Village Park, we have tennis courts, but they're unsafe to play in. And then throughout the city, we have benches, trash cans that are, in a state of disrepair and due for replacement. And while we know we can't do it all in 1 year, understanding where the problems are and building a sustainable capital plan and replacement plan is part of our goals. Daniel and I have worked really hard to make a lot of changes in the Public Works Department very similarly. It's data driven. We try to understand the status quo, what we're inheriting, and then incremental improvements and try to have really thoughtful planning, really inclusive budgeting, make sure we're spending our money in the areas where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. And then supporting infrastructure, the park doesn't end just because you're in the parking lot or you're looking at some of the, adjacent stormwater structure. It is all the park. It all plays into the perception of the park and the park system. And so when we look at parks and we talk about maintenance and operations, we are talking from curb line to curb line, the entirety of the park. And then professionalism and culture. For Ashley, this is probably one of the things that's the easiest to fix is, when you have folks doing landscape work in the field, cleaning up after yourself, taking pride in the sidewalks and cleaning out beds and repairing areas that have been damaged for whatever reason. This is stuff that doesn't cost money. It's just a change in culture and how we go about our work every day. And then finally, just kind of talking through the Parks Division as a whole. Daniel, and we did this over at Opside, just really making sure that we're not holding on to things we don't need that no longer serve a purpose. We're removing trash. We're auctioning or selling off items that we no longer use or have reached ends of life. And then I have another example here. We had some equipment that was unsafe to operate. So, a major focus of ours is safety in the workplace. And that starts with having safe equipment for our folks to work on. So I'm going to take a step back and just kind of discuss our park system. As a board, I think it's really important to understand the whole picture of how our park system, in terms of its size, in terms of the residents it serves, in terms of the budget and workforce, how that compares to other municipalities. And so there is a survey that's done every year that NRPA review. They collect data from all of the municipalities throughout the state. And I think this really kind of grounds where we're at in terms of the size of our park system and the resources we have to maintain it. So when we look at residents per park, I have a 25 and a 26 number for all of these. So 25 was before we brought Arrowhead, Hunter's Reserve online. Which one am I forgetting? Hunter's Reserve, Arrowhead, and Renaissance. We redid the playground. I'm missing one, but either way. So our residents per park in 25, before we brought these parks online, was 1,600 residents per park. Now we're at 1,400 residents per park. The median is closer to 2,000. So what that means is we have more parks that's serving our residents. They are out there. They are sites that we are relatively flush with park space and green space for our residents. When we talk about acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, same thing. We have more parks, we have more park space, we exceed the median. So what all this is pointing is we have more parks, we have more acreage for the same population as a lot of other municipalities. However, we are operating on a smaller budget and smaller workforce. And so that's kind of where we get to here. And so when we talk about annual operating expenses, it's kind of challenging because we're right on the cusp of the categories for sizing of communities. So they kind of break it down into less than 20,000 and 20 to 49,000. We're right at that kind of 22,000. So when we look at our annual operating expenses, we are kind of somewhere in between on the recreation and park side. And then when we start looking at our annual operating expenses per capita, we have a little less money per person generally when we're looking at kind of median levels. So last slide, more parks, more acreage. This slide, a little less money. And on kind of the money side, I don't know if Peter or Ty Hamer, the previous Parks and Rec director, talked to this board about the budget. So Parks gets money from two different sources. First is general fund, so that's subject to the annual budgeting cycle. City council goes, they come up with a budget. Of that, some of it can go to parks. Then we kind of have the park reserve bucket. So this is kind of the conservation trust fund. It's all based on state funding mechanisms. It's generally something we can rely to have every year that's just for parks. And our budget has had $75,000 per year for annual park improvements, $50,000 per year for structure repair, so that's pavilions, picnic tables under pavilions, things like that, and $35,000 per year for annual parks furnishing. So we don't have a big pot of money to address all the problems I identified, so it's really important for us to be very thoughtful with each and every dollar that was listed here. We're looking at most likely having less and less general fund contributions every year. That's just the fact of the matter. The cost of materials and labor is going up, and we have a police force that needs resources. We have a streets department that needs resources. So there is a constant competitive battle for the city's priorities and needs. On the other side of things, we do have mechanisms in place. So developments pay their way in a lot of cases. So we have a park impact fee. Generally, when a new development comes in, they pay this impact fee. We save that money up in an account, and then we use it to fund new parks like the Hunter's Reserve Park. There are some properties that we have that are slated for future parks. This would be a source for some of that funding. And if we don't use it, that just continues to grow. And then on the cemetery side, given that this is kind of its own thing, it does have its own line item, but it's incredibly small. So the parks team does maintenance and operations. There's a cemetery perpetual care fund that does provide some funds to ensure that the cemetery is funding a large portion of its upkeep. So here's the staffing side of things. So we break this down into the parks and recreation side in terms of full-time employees. So we have 10 parks employees. Rec has 3 full-time employees. So when you start looking at that kind of under 20,000 and 20,000 to basically 50,000, you can see we're a little under the median in terms of staff for the smaller communities, way under for the larger communities. And per 10,000 residents, it paints a similar picture. While the median's 13.7 or 9.6 park staff members per 10,000 residents, we're at 5.8. So we have a big footprint, and we have a smaller staff support to maintain it. And so that puts the burden on us as leaders of this group to be more thoughtful in how we use our staff's time. And so I kind of shared some pictures, but there's a lot that since we've taken over the parks division less than 6 months ago that we've uncovered that you can't see in pictures. This kind of comes down to, with an engineering and science background, my focus is infrastructure. So that's kind of my comfort zone, and that's where Daniel and I kind of look to first here. And I mentioned all those dead trees before, and so what we found was 70 plus irrigation zones not functioning properly. And we probably underestimated that pretty significantly. That was at the time. It's about 200 now. About 200 since we brought some irrigation techs on board. That's electrical faults, that's leaks, that's areas that weren't programmed, haven't been programmed for a decade plus. It's irrigation systems that were taken offline, and for whatever reason, the decision was made not to bring them offline. Like I said, our goal is infrastructure. Our goal is to make sure that we attack all 70 to 200 of these zones one at a time and start bringing our park system back to the standard it needs to, have the base conditions to have healthy turf, healthy vegetation, and leading to enjoyment for how residents are using them. We also had a few things that we've uncovered. We had broken bathroom locks, we had hazardous and ignored lighting, creating kind of safety concerns. Daniel was down at City Park and found that a number of the metal poles were energized. So at any point, a child could have touched it and gotten a zap because the lights weren't properly wired. So all things that we need to address with those budget numbers that I shared above that don't go as far as we'd prefer, but like I said, our job is to make sure we use that money and we use it in the right places, and then share with the board and work with the board to help make sure our priorities are aligned. And then we talk about culture a little bit. When we inherited the Parks Division, there was a lack of strategy. I kind of have this sign to the right of choose your own adventure. That's not how we run a city. That is not how we run operations. There was no prioritization. There was disorganized work crews. It was a completely reactive approach where folks would show up in the morning and ask, where do I go? And that's something that we want to take that away from people. That's Ashley's job. That's Daniel's job is to have work crews that are running a schedule, that are able to respond and think on the fly. That's not what we inherited. And on the same side, we had a staff that had minimal training or opportunities for training. A culture where training and learning were not encouraged. They weren't rewarded. They weren't prioritized. We encountered pesticide and herbicide use that was dangerous and non-compliant with state law. We found a lack of vegetation management knowledge. We had folks out there pruning weeds. We had folks out there scalping grass on athletic fields, all because they weren't given the opportunity to learn how to do their jobs to the best of their ability. We also had, I kind of mentioned, unsafe working conditions and a culture that didn't prioritize safety. That is 180-degree different from how these folks up here act, working with streets crews and utilities crews. When it comes to folks' safety, we don't mess around. And so a major goal of ours has been to make sure all of our folks are trained, all of our folks are outfitted with proper PPE, and are out in the field, trained, they know what they're doing, and are able to operate in a safe manner. So that was a lot of bad news. You know, as a Parks and Rec advisory board, it's not the information you want to hear. You are here to improve the system for yourselves, your families. But this information does tell us a really good picture. If we want to see transformation in our community, we have to just own that we have more parks and more park acreage, we have less budget and budget per capita, and we have less total staff and staff per 10,000 residents. So we have more responsibilities, less budget, less employees, and then we amplify that with this deferred maintenance, undertrained staff, and unclear strategy. And I should strike undertrained staff at this point, because I think in the last 6 months we've really prioritized that. And if any staff is watching this online, I just want the board to know that we have taken effort in the last 6 months to really address that and make sure folks are receiving training and are operating safely. And so when it comes to how we start, reaching this transformative leadership, how we turn this department around, it really comes down to force multipliers. So how do we make sure that we have the right people in the right roles to do the right work efficiently? And I touched on this: proper training, so building competency and expertise, building that culture where safety is the norm versus the hindrance. And one of the kind of first steps Daniel took was we subscribed to a training platform that put those at our employees' fingertips. And then Ashley has since pushed some landscape maintenance and sustainable landscape training for her staff. Proper equipment, this is a big one. There is efficiency through having the right tools for the job. I say a clean shop is a productive shop. That is true. Getting rid of the junk, having each vehicle properly stocked so that when folks are out in the field, they are able to do their job with the right equipment. And then we're also able to have off-the-shelf functionality. I mentioned some of that unsafe modified equipment. We don't do that anymore. That is not going to happen. We are going to buy the right tools for the right job. We're not going to buy stuff to modify later. That's not our staff's area of expertise. And it's resulted in, I think, some pretty major improvements, especially as we talk about, the parks team over the winter. It's a great opportunity for us to reset infrastructure. It's a great opportunity for us to go work on irrigation lines that we know have been abandoned, whereas previous staff was modifying trailers so they would be a little more usable the following year. So that's something we're really trying to avoid is our core focus is operations and maintenance of our parks. Let's make sure that is a year-round focus. And then thoughtful planning and budgeting. And so this makes sure that we bring every individual on Ashley and Daniel's team into the budgeting process. They all have an opportunity to share, where their pain points are. And, while they're never going to get every tool they want, we're never going to have, all of our requests met. It is an opportunity for those employees to be heard. And, if we happen to have excess funding and then some of these maybe nice to have items can be realized. And so Cody, our city manager, always says, when it comes to a municipal community, you have kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's been modified for how kind of the public sector functions. And with where the city of Evans is at and with some of the deferred maintenance we have, our focus as a team here has to be on the base of the pyramid. We need to make sure that we can establish core services and have the proper infrastructure to make sure that, we are building our park system in a sustainable manner. So, if we're focusing on infrastructure, we're focusing on parks that work, then we're focusing on safety and security of those parks, then we get to, being a desirable location for folks doing special events besides the city. We build economic resiliency for having a park system that people want to live near, and ultimately, that hits to quality of life and livability and your property values as homeowners, desirability for people to stay and work in our community. So I mentioned some of the organization that breaking up. So here's kind of what it looks like on paper. Daniel's that kind of top red field services manager. So he's overseeing the park superintendent. The reason why I put this slide up is this parks water irrigation lead. We quickly realized that our water irrigation, the irrigation system of our parks is deficient. It needs investment, it needs improvement. The best way to do that is to make sure we have a dedicated staff member separate from the day-to-day parks maintenance, fully focused on improving the irrigation system, the infrastructure of our parks. And by having that person under our water team, they're able to get all of the shared experiences of folks who work on the non-potable residential systems, even our potable systems, share a lot of the skills, tools, knowledge, and then have that person as kind of the liaison between the water utility parks. And I think it really paints a picture of, our goal is infrastructure improvement. By having this person bridging the gap between parks and water, we're taking that very seriously. And so when I took the parks team, I mentioned there was no priority list in how the parks team would go about maintenance. So say we have a situation where, there are a ton of needs throughout the city, and we have our parks team. How are we going to go about making sure that the city's resources are put in the place that's most visible, most used right off the bat? And so we kind of have this tier 1 regional significance item. So that's, if all priorities are on the table, this is where our first focus would be. And Evans Community Complex, that is the heart of the community, part of our governance. We want to make sure that our facility paints a picture that folks feel comfortable and feel safe being here. Riverside Park, the city spent a lot of money after flooding to rehabilitate that space. We use it for events throughout the year. It is one of those spaces that we have folks who come from other communities to enjoy. And then I also put special event locations because those are a drop everything type thing. Heritage Day does not happen without these wonderful parks and recreation staff members. And so when those come up, those become the priority. And you may see, tier 4 and tier 5 parks, we may have to pull some maintenance off of them, but we're doing it in a very thoughtful way for a very thoughtful reason. Tier 2, so we worked with City Council and the city manager to establish kind of the citywide significance parks. And so these are some of our larger parks that we found that are a little more present in some of our commercial corridors. So having a more beautification focus in these parks is huge to building a community people want to be in, businesses want to be in, and that's a goal of our city council. So, Driftwood, Prairie View, Village Park are all things that you see on some of our major drags. They also serve, major residential communities. So we have those as our tier 2 citywide significance. And then we hit tier 3, which is our larger neighborhood parks. I would say City Park kind of staggers between tier 2 and tier 3 because we do some events there. But this would be Da Vinci, Pioneer, Renaissance Ridge. They are parks that generally folks that are visiting are from a nearby surrounding neighborhood. And then we hit kind of the smaller parks and other, maybe the open space areas, things that the Parks Division's responsible for that maybe aren't a traditional park, like Tuscany Ponds, open spaces, the dog park, the ditch trail, all things that we need to maintain and operate, but probably don't rise to the level of Riverside Park. And our goal is not to skip things on this list. It's just that, when we get complaints, we want folks to understand here's where we prioritize and why during a given work week. When we have, let's say, a really wet spring, we're chasing weeds and we're chasing vegetation until it starts drying out. So our goals are always that our tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 parks are gems in the community. And that's kind of the goal we're hoping to achieve. And then that takes there's the sites, and then there's our operational priorities. And I break this down, and this kind of fits the theme of infrastructure. And so tier 1, to me, that's the infrastructure of the community. That's these emergency repairs to make sure that our landscape stays alive. That's making sure, equipment that we're using out there is safe for our workers and safe for folks who happen to be around them. The recreation program, folks pay money to enter these programs. We need to make sure we operationally prioritize that the fields, the facilities are ready for those events, those tournaments. Safety concerns, locks, lighting, so making sure, our bathrooms are safe, that if you go in, that, it is a safe space for you. And for the first time, we've rolled our Parks Department into snow response more heavily. So we have the Public Works Department has a split shift kind of approach to snow management. The Parks Department previously kind of handled things in their own orbit. We've brought them in to have a more cohesive snow response approach. It really doesn't apply this year given our snow situation, but in a year where we do actually have snow, the parks team will be a lot more involved in citywide snow removal operations. As we start getting to those tier 2 and tier 3 items, tier 2 I kind of see as those, the basic work items needed to just maintain the park system as is. So that's making sure our facilities are up to date. That's that mowing, spraying, weeding, weekly activities. And then we get to tier 3. These are kind of those things that happen a little less frequently because of vegetation needs or just as staff need assistance. So things like right-of-way mowing is typically a streets activity. But if we get a really wet period, the Parks Department can help with some of our green belts, the roundabout landscaping, because they do have that plant-centric experience at this point. And so now I just kind of want to share some of the accomplishments, right? I shared a lot of bad, I shared a lot of challenging, but here's a lot of really good things. Here's a lot of investment in the community, a lot of projects that have been completed. And I think this is part of the reason this board was formed, is because we had new parks coming online and we wanted to make sure outside of city council there were other folks involved in the process. So the first project is the Ridge Park Playground equipment replacement. If you haven't been out there, it is quite the structure. It is... was just, I think, right at, it might have been slightly under $700,000. The Arrowhead Park project on 37th by Arrowhead Drive and the Arrowhead Reservoir there. So that kind of turned into an abandoned field into a kind of more scenic open space type area that wrapped up in November of this past year. The Hunters Reserve Park project, so this was a more of a small neighborhood park that shares space with one of our stormwater retention pond areas, so has a nice little lawn area, playground, and then access right into the community. Renaissance Park, we had some playground equipment replacement work happening there, and I know that was a really popular park in its current form, but we had some underlying structural issues with the soft surface, lack of drainage that really deteriorated the soft surface from the bottom up. So by going in there and enhancing the playground, the equipment, putting new subsurface in, it's a whole new park out there now. And then Evans Ditch Trail, I have this one as completed because everything is completed but our CDOT reimbursement because the paperwork process is a bit painful. But this is the Evans Ditch Trail connection from 11th Avenue to 42nd Street that plays in as part of the city's larger goals to have connectivity through the Evans Ditch and Ashcroft Draw trail systems. And so looking ahead, I've said this a lot, but staff development and training, building staff, we have good folks. Ashley and Daniel's job is to make sure they have the training and experience to be successful. We're trying to roll out more formal asset management to make sure that, when things are replaced, they're done in a more thoughtful manner. We have understanding of every asset in a park. We know when they were installed. We know when repairs were made. This is kind of tailing into some of our utility system asset management. We're on the water side, wastewater side, trying to roll out comprehensive organizational-wide asset management where we're tracking work orders. We're able to integrate with customer complaints all in one platform. So the park system, while probably not the intended priority or focus of asset management, does benefit from the city moving in a direction where we're taking asset management very seriously. Ashley and Daniel are working on developing SOPs. We've had a lot of transition with our staff, so having standard operating procedures documented for our staff is really important, especially in some of these roles. We do see quite a bit of turnover. We bring seasonals on, we roll them off, sometimes they come back, sometimes we have new ones. So just having more documentation is a necessary step compared to, I think, where we've been. I mentioned the park signage replacement. That's the next thing that's going to come in front of this board. Like I said, we had rules up there that were unenforceable by our police department. They were an eyesore. We have a traffic sign printing shop now, so we can do a lot of our sign printing in-house. So our goal that we've kind of put on our sign printing technician Shelby is to come up with some designs for you all to consider. And we're going to try to be cohesive throughout the whole city and replace some of the old signage that needs to come down for compliance reasons, this is our opportunity to do it in a cost-effective manner. And then you're going to hear this a lot, but irrigation overhaul. That is the utmost priority in our parks, in our green belts, in our right-of-way medians. Our landscaping is expensive. Trees are expensive. One way that we stretch our budget is by not killing the things that we already have out in the field. So Ashley's team, this is going to be an ongoing effort with the number of irrigation problems we've identified, but we have staff fully focused on it, and we're going to continue really driving to make sure the core infrastructure supporting our parks is in place, is functioning, is using water sustainably, and is set up to best serve that park versus just being kind of installed and forgotten about. And like I said, progress is being made. We've done some enhancements to ECC in the back, in the front, really trying to update the landscaping, build stormwater swales into our landscaping. Prairie View Park, I mentioned those dead trees. I think Parks has been out there over the last few weeks and pulled out 2 or 3 dump trucks of just old mulch and debris in some of the 40 dump trucks. I was off by a factor of 20. And so that's our goal, right? Is we're going to make incremental progress, but you're going to see parks folks in the field making that progress, and that's, I think, a little bit different from what the city's seen in the past. And so, that's our commitment to you as board members. Is we are and have been looking at the Parks Division completely, from how we go about business to the culture supporting our employees. And I think we're really starting to see improvements. We're really starting to see a team coming together, having Public Works and Parks under the same umbrella. They used to have a bit of a competitive relationship. We share the same operations complex with 2 different office spaces. Now they're getting together more often. We're working on cross-training opportunities so we can elevate leaders that show potential between divisions. And I'm pretty excited about the direction that we're moving in. And then I put this last slide, despite setbacks, because I gave this presentation to City Council. I was feeling good about some of the progress we were making. And then Daniel sent me these pictures that someone went into one of our bathrooms and destroyed all of the stainless steel fixtures, mirrors, and it's just a reminder that, we can have the best intentions, we can put the best work together, but there are times you're going to walk into a bathroom like this, and there's nothing we can do about that. We try to assess our policies. We're working closely with our PD department, but folks are going to be challenging from time to time, and we're only ever a help ticket away from getting these addressed. It's just, it's very often a resident is the first one to find this, and it's not because it's ignored. It's because when we last were in there, everything was perfect. So I wanted to share that with you, with City Council, that we are doing our best, but there are setbacks that happen, and that's just the nature of the business. So I'm going to open it up for questions. You can ask me, Daniel, or Ashley directly if it's kind of more operational. I think Ashley's probably your source. Daniel's kind of linking things together. And then if you have any recreation questions, Jen's back there and I can pull her in.
So with the irrigation, we're going to work on irrigation first, obviously, before we start replanting everything. I mean, that's right. My other question is all the medians, like on 37th and 42nd, does that fall under this too, or is that Parks and Rec too with all the trees and the medians?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yes, all of the medians, center medians, and then I call streetscapes, the landscaped areas on either side of the road. That all falls under the Parks umbrella. Those are all things we need to work on. 42nd and 37th, the older sections that you've probably driven by a bunch, you probably notice there's not much going on there. You have some sparse mulch. Those irrigation systems have been offline for years. We are going to bring those back, but we're going to have to pull in all brand new pipe. But it is on the list because those are decent trees that we don't want to lose either. And then we have potential. Once we get the basics down, we could even consider putting some hardscape elements in there, some boulders, and then maybe a little bit more shrubbery, kind of liven it up. But definitely, you have to excuse me. I want to save the trees first.
Yeah, and on the landscaping and irrigation side, generally our landscaping throughout most of the parks is somewhat established despite some of these irrigation setbacks. So we are trying to drive the car while partially building it in some cases. There are other areas, some of our green belts, like if you've been around the ridge pond, that have been completely abandoned. The vegetation's gone. In those instances, we will go back and we will do the irrigation first, and then planting comes after. In some cases, it may be the year following. It's really going to come down to budget availability. That's going to be our challenge. Plants are not going down in price, that's for sure.
So I'm just assuming the irrigation is probably going to eat up most of the budget just to kind of redo and reamp everything, or
We're trying to be thoughtful with that balance because it's really hard to sell folks on progress you can't see.
right?
And I think that's what folks have been experiencing is, you don't see improvements with the parks, even though we've had some changes. If we don't make some above ground improvements, you're going to say the same thing. Oh, well, what are you doing? Because unless you're out there seeing them digging the trench that day, there's no improvement. So I think our goal is to try to strike a balance. We may have 200 zones that aren't functioning, but we have hundreds that are. And so we've had a lot of conversations with city council about some small improvements at places like Riverside Park. We're working through trying to figure out where are some of that equipment or furnishing or structure budgets going to be used. We're just kind of looking at budgeting, I think, in a different manner than was done previously, where the city would just say, okay, we have $35,000. Let's buy as many picnic tables as we can this year. Next year, we'll buy as many trash cans as we can buy that year. And then you spread it out, but there's no visual impact. No one notices one new picnic table with one new picnic table at 14 park sites. But if we make, a concerted effort to make some of the smaller spaces that folks spend time in more enjoyable, add beautification to them. I think an example is the Prairie View parking lot, right? It's the area that they've been focusing on recently. It was all weeds. It was all overgrown with dead woody debris, trash. That's a community. That's a community resource. We do get a lot of drive-in traffic there. So spending a little bit of staff time and a little bit of money for new mulch and ripping out some of the old landscape fabric makes a huge impact. It doesn't really play into that. We're fixing the irrigation in there to make sure we're not putting plants in that are going to die. But that's kind of what our focus has been. Let's focus on making sure that folks feel the improvements and not spreading them out to a point where it just you wouldn't notice it unless I told you.
Right. Yeah.
Well, maybe off the report side, if there's no more questions, I'll ask as we start moving into this park signage side of things. Does this board have any thoughts on signage elements you've liked that we should use as inspiration? We're having conversations about should the entry sign be separate from rules signs? We've had conversations about our previous signs were 20% the title of the park and 75% rules. We need to boil that down a bit. Any kind of thoughts on things you've seen that work well or maybe cost efficient?
Just kind of going off with like how Windsor and how I like it is have like a big park sign, like a big welcoming park sign, and then like where the restrooms are at or whatever, right? You could just have your rule sign type thing right there where it's visible. Kind of separate it. So like, for instance, like right off 42nd, that's Prairie. That's the Prairie View Park, I believe, right? The skate park. Just have like a big sign right there where it's visible from 42nd Street. And then, you know what I mean? And then when you don't have the rule sign with it. So when you park into the parking lot, there could be the rule sign right there where the restrooms are at. Type stuff like that where, because like what you said, like you don't see the park name. You just see all the writing. Something like that, I think would be more inviting.
Yeah, that's great feedback. That was a question that we originally had was, do we do a park sign and then do a rule with a QR code on the back? But generally those are in separate places. So yeah, that's good feedback. And I think one of Ashley's passions is flower beds. And so I think we can, really work to, even if we're doing a more budget friendly approach to printing our own signs, not doing big decorative engraved signs, how can we make sure that the whole, the whole picture feels right?
And then kind of, and we can talk offline too about this. But like going off like with the trails and stuff right along Riverside and all that, do we have like any plans with the police department to patrol that area a little bit more? Since the trail does go from right there where the police station's at, all the way under the bridge, and then all the way to Riverside. Is there any future plans or insights on that, putting that together? Or like I said, we can talk offline about that too. So
Yeah, absolutely. And we brought on a new police chief about 6 months ago, Chief Darling, and he's great. I think he's open to comments on if you're feeling like there are some deficiencies there. Another side is our parks team can be more present as well, right? It's sometimes just having people there with a city vehicle, with city equipment, that can help as well. So I can definitely bring it up with Chief Darlin and see if they have an ability to do that. I don't know if they have any smaller vehicles that are appropriate for the trail, but we've definitely as we expand our trail network, safety and police presence is something we'll have to consider. So I'll bring it up with him right away and just find out for you.
thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Does staff have anything else to report, or are there any further questions for staff? No. Seeing none, this meeting is now adjourned.